Welcome to World Chef's podcast. I'm your host, Ragnar, and this is World on a Plate. Just a big reminder here, we have World Chef Congress in Singapore coming up very soon, October 2024, don't miss. One of the key topics there is, and the theme is Culinary Horizon, inventing the future of our industry. And another great aspect of that is the future of culinary education. And so on that topic, and give you a bit of a glimpse, I have a special guest joining us. I have with me Jason Evans, who is the Dean of the College of Food Innovation and Technology at the Johnson and Wales University. And so together we're going to be discussing the future of culinary education and get some insights from Jason. So I just want to jump right in. Jason, welcome on the show. Great to have you.
Thank you very much, Ragnar. It's an honor.
It's an honor for us, and I mean we've known the Johnson and Wales University for quite a while now, and a lot of our colleagues are members of your faculty. Quite an avant-garde. For those maybe around the world who don't know, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about the position of Johnson and Wales in the U.S.
Sure. So Johnson Wales actually just celebrated its 110th birthday this year. But we've really only had culinary or culinary-related programming at the university for 50 years, since 1973. And in that time, it has certainly grown to one of the largest food-centric student populations in the United States. So right now, we have campuses in Providence, Rhode Island, Charlotte, North Carolina, and then a growing online campus.
Right. And I mean, I know from following you, you've been quite avant-garde in education, and you have quite a high standard and quite a, as I said, innovative approach in the US. And this is why I wanted to get you on this show.
Sure.
And like as I said, jump right into it. And
Great.
so I know that you work on the subject of to was closely looking at a lot of change and tremulence in the hospitality industry, and not to mention the education. Maybe you can provide us with some insights from you to the what is the current state of culinary education in the USA as to like a few years back, and what do you see it going?
Sure. So, I would say that importantly, after the last non-COVID recession, so 2009, enrollment in culinary and similar programs across the United States boomed, in part because, finding a job right out of high school was difficult in that economy. And so that really favored enrollment in technical career preparatory type programs. And a number of programs really sprung up across the country at community colleges and even at the high school level. And I would say that most culinary programs were sort of riding that enrollment wave through about 2014 and 2015. And certainly it's in that period that Johnson Wales even hit its zenith in terms of its overall student population. Of course, as the economy recovers and there are plenty of work opportunities, even for unskilled right out of high school grow, enrollment in 2- and 4-year culinary or similar programs declined. And that's really the trajectory that we were in come the pandemic. And the pandemic unquestionably impacted enrollment in programs all over the country that are traditionally hands-on, where you do need to be in person for learning. And in fact, in the summer of 2020, Johnson Wales was about the first university in the country to come back to in-person learning. We had sent our students home in March of 2020, and by July of that year, they were already back in labs finishing their spring courses. I would say that right now, there's sort of a new renaissance in food-related programming in the United States, happening again at the high school level, the community college level, and we're seeing it in our enrollments even for the fall 2024 semester. But I think for different reasons. Again, 2009 recession, difficult to find a job. Now, We're returning to sort of the excitement around food that came with the advent of food television in the 1990s. I mean, certainly there had been chefs in media and on television before that, long before that. But the 1990s was really, the world is now, it's available every day to them. And so there's a whole slate of food programming on television. And that really boosted interest in food and food careers. What we're seeing now, I think, is an artifact of food media more generally. And the fact that people celebrate food as part of their identities every single day. I mean, how often do you go to a restaurant and the minute that a plate is dropped, the first thing a young person does, or not even just young people anymore, is take a photo of it. And so I think even subconsciously now we celebrate food more than in any other part of the modern era as part of our identity. I also think the pandemic itself, we heard all of these stories in the United States of families sort of being stuck at home and baking together. When we ask students now why they're coming into baking and pastry programs, they do reference that pandemic experience of learning to love baking with their family. So food is on a pedestal right now in terms of how people celebrate their identities, in terms of, it's a career where you can celebrate creativity, where you really can put your identity into your work. And I think that's compelling to young people right now. So a new renaissance, at least in terms of interest for food education, that I'm very excited for.
Yeah, that's really positive, and hey, it feels good to have a positive input
Yeah,
after we've been talking about all the challenges and difficulties I had, but of course, with the challenges, there are opportunities, and
for sure.
yeah. So one, yeah, I mean, guess the first question that comes to my mind, because it's exactly what you say. We celebrate our food. I wonder if industry is ready to then take over these individuals. Are they going to stay in our industry? Are they going to be the motor for driving our industry with all the skilled workforce needed?
Well, that's always a great question. And of course, the great unknown right now is automation and artificial intelligence and how those will find their way into these industries, especially at the entry level that a lot of our students walk into. And of course, the with sort of the backdrop of rising wages, the pressure for automation and replacing labor, I think, is as high or higher than it's ever been. So I think that the answer to that, or at least the way we talk about it at Johnson and Wales, is that means it's very important to buttress this technical skills-based education with a comprehensive liberal arts education so that our students, we believe, are very nimble. Yes, they have technical training in food and hospitality, but they have all of the communications and social science and mathematics as part of their experience here, that they're really nimble and frankly can transition into any industry. We believe, though, that technical training in food, yes, of course, you learn a lot about food, but more than that, being in our lab environments, we think builds professional and soft skills that translate into any industry. Employers love our kids because, they learn here that if there's a job that still needs to be done, you stay and do it. That the kitchen has to get cleaned somehow. And I'm using that metaphorically, that I think that translates into any professional workplace. So I think that's the answer. No matter what happens in the unknown 5 years from now with this industry, as long as we're graduating students that have a sort of a transitional skill set and an intellectual curiosity, I think we're well positioned.
Right. And that's interesting because that takes us back to the whole debate that has been happening since I started industry is vocational training, in restaurant training, the practical training versus school educational training for culinarians. And I think, well, what you're saying is, well, the technical part of the food part is probably the easy part, if I can put it into the parentheses, easy as such. It is technical and it's like it can be learned. But that, so for you, the future of culinary education, or for culinarians, the future culinarian is going to have a better understanding of and a bigger skill set, understanding of the environment in which he is operating within. You mentioned social media, and you mentioned having economic science and social science and understanding cultures and being more volatile in the way they can react to the future variations of demand.
That's right.
Wow.
That's right. And I think it's it's putting food in its context, right? If a student comes to us always having dreamed of being an executive chef or a Michelin at a Michelin rated property, we still very much have students that go into those more traditional pathways and spend their lives, working in kitchens and becoming very successful. I think there's great honor in that. We love that. And we think Johnson & Wales graduates have helped to redefine the American food scene because of that. However, I think that what we're guided by to some extent is the way people are eating these days. I mean, look at how sophisticated the CPG world is in the grocery store right now, and the demands that people have for packaged, convenient, nutritious, as whole as possible, delicious food. In a lot of product categories, that requires very sophisticated food science. That requires a biochemist working with a culinologist to produce a food that's going to hold up on the shelf and meet with increasingly tough consumer demand. So I think that that's just an example of you have to have the science and chemistry context of food to make food that way. You have to have the marketing context of food to successfully launch and survive in those businesses. So I think you've put it right that educating students this way means that they understand the context of food, which means they better understand the 1,000 spots out in the labor market for somebody with an interest in, passion for, and skills around food. I think if we don't present them with the full context, they may not even understand all of the opportunities they have.
Really interesting. And you did mention earlier also technology. Have you seen a big change in well, let's say since you joined Johnson & Wales over the last years, how technology innovation is shaping the culinary industry, and what specifically how are you embracing that at Johnson & Wales? How do you see any special examples or trends in that direction?
Yeah, so for academia in general, this is still very complex. And I would say just in our day-to-day business of making assignments to students, making project assignments, asking students to write papers, I don't think that where we will ultimately end up in the way that we, allow students to incorporate artificial intelligence into their responses. So academia is still figuring that out. What I think it probably ends up being is that we actually teach use of these tools, and then the richness of the assignment becomes editing for content, editing for writing style, editing for writing effectiveness.
Right.
Which means completely fundamental paradigm shift for what we've expected from students for eons, right? So there's that piece of it. How does it actually impact the education process? And I think the institutions that are most progressive about that will do students a big favor, right? Let's actually teach proper usage of these tools with an ounce of caution, right? That you still need to learn how to look at generated material and assess it for accuracy and effectiveness. Beyond that, for the industry itself, I think one of the first places that we'll see big impact of generative artificial intelligence is in product design. I mean, asking an algorithm, basically asking technology to take the first pass at designing a formula that checks nutritional and flavor and other profile boxes, that takes a lot of the initial brainstorming groupthink work out of product design And I don't think that's altogether bad, because you still have to then have the culinologists, the food scientists in the room to hone and hone and hone. But I think if that technology gives us more efficient starting points, I think that that's great. And who knows the implications for just managing teams, managing people, managing systems, managing inventory, managing supply chains. Those tools are only going to help the industry, but to some extent, it will over time, just as I mentioned before, it will over time, I think, mean a system that relies less on labor. And so you have less people, but what we then begin paying a premium for are brains, right? The managers, the leaders, the thought leaders, the big ideas, which again, I think speaks to the importance of really comprehensively educating students to be thinkers.
Mm-hmm. And that sort of brings us to I mean, I guess I come from a generation where internet didn't exist yet, and but if I tell that to a 20-year-old student today, they would just like, so
They don't believe it.
how did you survive?
Yeah.
And so what you're dealing with now is, and there's been a lot of talk about Generation Z. I mean, they're not to blame for all of our problems, not at all, none of our problems. But it's an interesting case study. Is actually young people today, and you're talking about being IT savvy and using technology correctly, and all this information flow, how to distill it and use it correctly. Uh, I mean, do you see in your I guess you have a lot of Generation Z in your institution now. And any sort of typical characteristics of how you have had to adapt different expectations they might have.
That's a great question. And I have a lot of thoughts about it. And I actually would say, let me preface the kind of bad news with good news, and that is our last freshman class, so the fall 2023, we could tell that those students had a much more normal high school experience than the two classes that preceded them. Much more engaged. They hid less. They really took on extracurricular opportunities when we offered them. So I hope that's a sign of things to come, that once we normalize that high school experience to the extent that we can post-pandemic, that it at least means these students are coming to us socialized and ready for the college experience. So that's good news. I would say, though, that in general, culturally, we're much more individualistic, I think, in the way that we look at the world. And sometimes I think that's because our connection to the rest of the world, our connection to our community, is contrived. It's virtual. I perceive that I'm connected to and maybe advocating for something bigger than me, but I'm really not. I'm doing it in a way that's still kind of convenient to my time demands. I can do it whenever I want, however I want. And frankly, I can craft whatever identity I want to interact in the larger social sphere because it's all virtual now. So there's a me-ness to how we think about the world that maybe is more than it would have been in my generation or your generation. I think that there's good implications of that. I mean, I think that it means that people recognize that they, as individuals, are important, and that they can actually do good things and big things. But I just hope we don't get buried in this sort of contrived virtual community space, and forget that sometimes to actually make big things happen, you still have to do stuff. You have to learn things. You actually have to interact. You have to take risks. This generation is far more risk averse than the generations that came before them. And we did that to them. I mean, there's an entire history of events that made our sort of parenting approach much more sheltering, much more protective. And so the students are not risk takers as much as their predecessors might have been. So I just hope that these experiences that we believe connects us to our community, which are contrived, doesn't fool us into believing that we don't actually still have to get out there and do big things and take big risks sometimes and interact and make real relationships with people. I actually see this undercurrent now, though, of even phone companies and internet providers saying to people, hey, put your phone down for a few minutes. So I think if that sort of thinking becomes trendy,
Yeah.
it'll reverse itself, and young people will find their way back into the world again. As you know, in our line of work in food and hospitality, it's people. It's a people
Yeah.
business, and I hope we don't take those virtual community experiences as real community experiences, and that we push once again to really understand and interact with and provide experiences for real people.
Yeah. I mean, really interesting, and but yeah, I like your examples of how to bring a bigger meaning and understanding into the educational package. It sort of makes the whole thing fall into context.
That's
Uh,
right.
so I mean, have you seen that in Johnson and Wales you've had to adapt? Has it been like a adaptation of programs in other ways of the way you work with the Generation Z, that you have had to make adaptations that have been? Well,
I would say that, well, first of all, um, especially in the last 3 years, we have provided a lot of professional development opportunities for our faculty in dealing with some of the stress and anxiety that this generation, at least in the last couple of years, are presenting with more than they have in the past, which, to some extent, again, is driven by that sort of isolationism, that individualism, loneliness, and frankly, these these expectations that failure is failure, and failure can't possibly be good for me. So a lot of professional development for faculty, and of course supported by our mental wellness staff, our counseling staff,
right. So
dealing with
you have
those
a mental
day-to-day
wellness
issues.
staff. So that's the approach you do. Tell us more
Right.
about that. So I mean, I don't know if all schools will do that or have done that.
We've had to. My guess is you'd be hard pressed to find a college or a university in the country that hasn't shored up the counseling infrastructure they have for students who are experiencing stress or anxiety, especially in programs like these. I mean, our lab days are 6 hours long, and they're pretty intense. And so we hope and we believe that over time, over the course of 2 years or 4 years, that actually makes a student stronger, gives them more confidence, knows that failing isn't the end of the world. It's a safe space to fail. So in addition, I think, to building up our capacity for handling those case by case scenarios, frankly, I think the most important thing that we've done is to go back to the basics, which is the college experience holistically is what's important. And so outside of the classroom, that means that we have really ramped up extracurriculars. We've ramped up skills labs that students don't have to go to, but they can, and learn a little bit more from their faculty, learn more about their faculty. We bring in probably more external guest speakers, alums, successful industry professionals, food thinkers than we ever have in the past. Um, because those are the folks, I think, more credibly than anybody, who can say, I achieved something big in food and hospitality, and boy, did it take work. Boy, did it put me in some uncomfortable situations. Man, did it make me take some risks. And really forced me to depend on my network, right? I could not have done this without the support of other people. So, I mean, colleges and universities have made those opportunities available to students for generations. We lost it in the pandemic.
Yeah.
That, I think, is the most important thing that we've done, is just to reinforce the messaging we do in our classrooms with people, professionals that our students can really look up to, and draw some lessons from.
Mhm. And it sort of sounds a bit like, that what we used to have like in the old days when you were like an intern in a restaurant, is that sort of mentorship
Yep,
mentality. You had a master, and that master was like your guide in all things.
that's right.
The
And
profession.
all of our programs still require internships, our associates programs, our bachelor's programs. So that industry experience under a mentor is still incredibly important for us. It's just that now, relative to, 20 years ago, the breadth and scope of organizations that our students are doing internships at is
Yeah.
far broader. I mean, they're really working all across the food and hospitality landscape.
Something like maybe mentorship has changed or needs to change in the sense that it is not the old type of mentorship. I'm going to show you how to make a mayonnaise, but it's actually a mentorship of building your career as a person and getting you ready mentally and
That's right.
so that
100%. I think life lessons are more important to this generation than they've ever been. Um, and I would have benefited from it too. I mean, I think about myself as a 20-year-old. It would have been great to hear some professionals that I admired say, you can do this too, but you got to work for it. And you're going to have setbacks, and failure is fine. But here's what I did. Here's the network that you need to build. Um, Everyone benefits from that. But I just think that, that with this generation really taking setback and failure difficult. I mean, it is hard for them, and it speaks to their resilience. I think the more times that you can say success requires failure, success requires failure, and model it, I just think it's going to make them better.
Mhm. And so, what could schools do actually to? I mean, you said university schools actually they naturally build to create that environment of engaging because it gets you out of your homes, and COVID sort of broke that. But like now with when we're seeing that people and young people, and we're all like so obsessed with our phones, and sort of we just go almost without looking up from school
Mm.
back to home to our computers. What could schools do to create a more engaging, inspiring environment that pushes you out there? And I don't know if you have any specific events or
Yeah. So besides our speaker events, where you've got an audience of 100 or 120 students, very, very regularly outside of class, the key there is to make sure that that speaker is relevant to their career aspirations, is engaging and energetic. So that's one of our techs. We also have a lot of food-centric events on campus where the university hosts outside guests, dignitaries. We partner with nonprofit organizations to put on fundraising events. We do our own fundraising events. We incorporate as many students as possible as staff to those events, as volunteers in those events. It's just getting them a lot of practice being in front of people, and practicing those skills that they're learning in the classrooms anyway. So the common core to both of those approaches is creating opportunities for students to interact with people from different generations, for one thing. I mean, incredibly diverse people in general, but uh, from different generations who, just they think about the world differently. They interact differently. So it's really just, we also do the fun stuff that is all, there's fairs and festivals and the things that students are coming to really just to meet other students. Again, this fall, we saw, I think, some renewed interest and excitement from students for things like that. Um, I just think that you've got to create a breadth of programming that speaks to as many as we possibly can. Not everybody's interested in the same thing. And we also, of course, have to assume that there are always going to be students, and there always were students who, outside of class and outside of work, are probably going to hide in their dorm rooms. I mean, and that's okay. I mean, that's some of us are wired that way. I was probably wired that way a little more than most. But the programming is available, it's diverse, and we really try to check all the boxes of interest.
Yeah. Hey, just to to finish off, I mean, I was yeah, I was positively surprised, I would even say, by your first statement of that culinary education and the food is attracting young people to your institution or to culinary schools. And I wonder if we already have some sort of vision for what their intentions are after their studies, and whether industry is ready to receive them. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. You know, your students, are they actually, do they have a specific path they would like to pursue? Is that in the culinary, in any part of culinary in particular, with more in media than culinary, for example? And then those who choose culinary, is the industry ready to receive them in a way that they are motivated and they will be retained as talent in our industry? Or does industry have to adapt or change? Big question, lots of talk.
It is. And luckily, you know, I think a lot of the industry did change in the way they onboard and treat and compensate even entry-level employees, because it had to. I mean, when an industry is struggling to attract people into it, that industry has to take I think a deep look at how it's operating, to say that there may be a reason why people, at least in this new generation, aren't seeing this as a viable career path. And so let's rethink the work week. Let's rethink compensation and retirement benefits and healthcare, and frankly, how we're communicating in the actual kitchen, how we're communicating in the workplace, to make sure, to your point, that it's a little more nurturing. It's more about mentoring than it is about yelling. I think a lot of the industry has figured that out. However, of course, these jobs for these students that really want that more traditional career path as an executive chef, they're not easy. And you are always going to work on weekends, and you're always going to work late. You're always going to be in a physically uncomfortable environment on your feet. And I would say that the proportion of students that we have are graduates that picked that trajectory and stayed with it for most of their career. I would say I still have the same proportion of students that are dead set on that pathway, and they're going to do it, and they're going to succeed no matter what it takes. The good news is that the opportunities have just expanded in ways that I think 15 years ago you might not have imagined. I mean, we have a lot of students right now that are going and working for professional sports teams, collegiate sports teams, gym and fitness organizations as performance chefs. We have a lot of students that end up with catering and personal chef companies. We have a ton of students because of what's happening in CPG. A lot of students that go and work for the Nestle's and the Krafts and the major food manufacturers as corporate and research chefs. Students that'll go and work as consultants. Students that'll go and work in management in resort and club and hotel. And you know, I just think that this is because humans will always crave experience, will always crave something special on their plate, or a special experience at a hotel or a resort. Companies are figuring this out, right? They are innovating every day, one-upping competition on what's on the plate, the experience in the restaurant, the experience at the hotel. And so I just think that even 10, 15 years from now, the opportunities and jobs and careers that will create for thinkers, for entrepreneurs, for creatives, we can't even imagine. So I would say the set, I still have the same proportion of students probably that are just diehards on that very traditional executive chef or pastry chef route, but the opportunities for everyone else I think, are broader and more diverse than they've ever been.
I think that's a great wrap up of our talks, and it leaves us with well, the challenges that give us a lot of opportunities, and the opportunities are greater than ever, and it's a positive direction for our industry. So I really want to thank you, Jason, for
Boris.
coming on board and sharing that. Unless there
No,
was
thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
No, I really appreciate, and we're gonna provide information where our listeners, they can come to the podcast page and learn more about your programs. Unless there was anything else you wanted to add to those.
Well, so I will end by saying my hope, my personal hope, is that the excitement sort of culturally around food and food as part of people's identities, I hope that that ultimately translates into us re-elevating the importance of food to every part of our lives, including our health and longevity. It's happening in the medical community to some extent, not quick enough. But this notion of food as medicine, food for quality of life, that we are in fact what we eat, that is only going to elevate the importance of food and food professionals even further. Once we collectively figure out that you actually live longer and better lives if you eat better food.
Well, that's a great food for thoughts.
Yeah, right.
And you're absolutely right. So yeah, thank you for adding that, and
Sure.
some great podcasts about food and health, and as one person put it, it is not a coincidence that the chef jacket is white, similarly to the doctor's jacket, because originally it was the medicine, the village medicine, who created, composed the dish for you to eat in case of stomach hurt or whatever ache you would have.
That's
So
right.
Healing through food, and it's a very important part.
Right.
Excellent, Jason.
Thank you, Ragnar.
Thank you very much for sharing all this with us, and yeah, we will put this on the podcast page, all the information, and with the links to your programs, and invite our listeners to learn more about the trends in culinary education in our podcast and World Chef Congress and Expo coming up in Singapore in October this year. So we're going to be touching base on these issues and have a lot of symposium and discussion, and hopefully a lot of mind-opening debates about the future of our industry and education in particular. So thank you, everybody, for logging into our podcast. I'm your host, Ragnar. This is World on a Plate. Jason, thank you again, and you stay safe. I hope to see you soon.
Thank you, Ragnar.
Thank you very much, and take care, everybody. Bye-bye.